What happens in the sky affects life down here on Earth. The celestial compass shows you how and guides your way with astrology you can use from professional astrologer Kathy Biehl. Every episode features her light-hearted, practical forecasts and navigational tips, blended with humor, optimism, and a love of patterns, symbolism, and pop culture references. Kathy translates technicalities into concepts that apply to real life. You'll learn how the current moment ties to where we've been, from the recent past to cycles that last happened years ago, and get a look at where we're heading. And much more, from special topics to special guests. The Celestial Compass, enlightening, entertaining, and empowering. Here's your host, Kathy Biehl.
Greetings, Earthlings. This is Kathy Biehl of EmpowermentUnlimited.net with another spin of the Celestial Compass. We're going to be talking today about Neptune in Pisces with someone who has been living out its potentials in a really fascinating way. But first, let me update the forecast for you. We're moving into a massive retrograde time, which is nothing to be feared. For a couple of weeks, Venus has been retrograde, and most of the outer planets have been retrograde. And on August 23rd, Mercury, which rules communication, joins the bunch. In September, once Venus goes direct, then Jupiter takes on the retrograde status. So what does this mean? The last couple of weeks in August are going to really intensify and accelerate the experience of ghosts from the past coming to the fore, and opportunities to rediscover parts of yourself, to learn things that maybe you thought about in one way and it turned out to really be something else. There will be a massive possibility of miscommunication and confusion. But again, with Mercury being in Virgo, there's also a very high potential for stopping and looking at details, reorganizing, and putting a lot of things back into a form where they're easier to go forward. Venus will be traveling over the territory of Mercury's retrograde when she gets to Virgo in October, and she's also in charge of the eclipses then. The way to understand that now is you're gathering information that you're later going to really assimilate and do something with in a couple of months. So this is a massive staging time for October. I know that a lot of people have been having really intense and often painful and unpleasant experiences with this Venus retrograde because it's been lighting up what the condition of your spark and your ability to enjoy life actually is. And if you're not happy with yourself, it could be a really, really dangerous time. I know of a whole bunch of early childhood traumas that have come to the surface with the potential to put them in a different container, a different role in your life. I encourage you to do that if you're one of those people, to find bits of yourself that have gone astray and to allow them to come out and play. My general lecture about all this is notice who fuels your spark, notice who seems to get who you are, notice where you seem more enthusiastic, gravitate toward those situations, notice who seems to be energized by your presence. Stop trying to win over the people who don't get you. That can be an intellectually hard thing to do, but value your own light and your own spark enough to leave these people to whatever their paths are. And please, please, please get away from anybody who's got a water pistol or a bucket that they're aiming at you. So with that, we're going to start talking about this mysterious Neptune in Pisces. This hasn't been getting a lot of attention, which is actually kind of appropriate with all of the other planetary activity going on this summer. Neptune has a very slow transit. It takes a long time to go through a sign. It's the planet of absolute boundlessness. It is transcendence, utter unhinging from worldly, earthly experience. This is not something that helps you pay your bills, or rather pay attention to the details of your bills. Mercury's retrograde in Virgo will help you do that. It's in its home sign of Pisces, hasn't been floating around in this part of the zodiac since the mid-1800s. And there is an opportunity with this and its highest potential for great spiritual wisdom, for dissolving of boundaries between your rational mind and your inspiration. It can also make you a real space case. And if you're a mid to late degree Pisces, you may have found yourself really wondering what in the world is going on, as if your sense of yourself has just been disintegrating. Be kind, put some safety nets in place, and know that there is something really magical that you could be creating out of this, which leads to the conversation we're going to have today. Our topic is Neptune in Pisces and fluid creativity, and I want to explore this with a friend of mine, Fred Everett Maus, whose creative curiosity and path are a fascinating embodiment of the transit's positive potentials. So let me give you a little background about Fred before I introduce him. He's a classically trained pianist and now a professor of music at the University of Virginia. He's written on music and narrative, gender and sexuality in relation to discourse about music, queer popular music, embodiment, music therapy, trauma, and other subjects. He was a founding member of the editorial board of the journal Women and Music, and for several years its book review editor. He served as the first chair of the Queer Resource Group of the Society for Music Theory, and more recently as the first chair of the Society's Standing Committee on LGBTQ Issues. He's also a teacher of meditation, a published poet, and more recently, a student of the tarot. His diverse interests led him to a peak Neptune in Pisces experience, which is what prompted me to ask him to come onto the show. It's called La Pocha Nostra Summer School, an immersive, cross-cultural, cross-disciplinary, and cross-generational laboratory in performance art techniques that explore the relationship between the human body, Mexican mysticism, psychomagic, and the politics of identity. So if you're still with us, let me welcome you, Fred. Thanks for being here.
What a beautiful introduction, Kathy. Thanks so much. There are things that Kathy say. Can you hear me? Is everything working?
Yes, yeah, we hear you just fine. Thank you. Yeah.
Great.
And I should probably...
have known Kathy since we were in second grade.
Second grade.
When we were the leaders of an organization called the Trash Hunters of America.
Oh, beautiful. That's a good way of putting it.
What that meant is that on the way to our elementary school, John S. Armstrong, which we both lived about the same distance from, we would walk through the alleys and see what people were throwing away that didn't need to be thrown away. And that was super fun. I will never forget it. She's always been a really lovely person and really lovely and compatible with me. And it's great to be here talking with you.
I recall, thank you, and I recall, yes, I was just going to say, I recall once we tried to revive a bird that was pretty obviously dead, but that's what we tried to do.
Yeah.
Brought it into your mother's house.
Mm-hmm. There were many adventures, so we had lots of time to do stuff. So, yes, I'm glad to be here. I've listened to some of the previous podcasts, and often they're about someone who has something very definite worked out that they want to share, like a system of thinking about things. I am not that person. My role here today, I think, is to talk about how you should never stop learning and you should never stop changing, and how things can be very beautiful that you never knew about until the moment when you encounter them. So Go ahead.
Well, can we start with where you started in terms of your? I just want to give a brief background for the framework of where this journey started before we get into the steps of it. You had very serious classical music training from early on.
Absolutely, yeah. And music is such an interesting thing because it's so intense and it's so meaningful, and often we can't say what it is that it means. And I think that's a very beautiful training for life, to be patient with valuing something and not quite knowing why, feeling like you understand something but not quite knowing what it is that you understand. And that, for me, is very definitely a part of classical music and always has been. Anyone who says or writes that they've solved a particular piece of music, that they know what it means now, that they can tell you historically or hermeneutically what the meanings are, is off base. So much of it is about learning to be patient with what you don't understand and learning to love what you don't fully understand. So that's been with me forever. My parents were classical musicians, and I grew up with that music. They loved it. I'm sure they couldn't have told you why exactly. And the same for me. So any thoughts about that, Kathy?
Well, what I think of is that when you study classical music, you're looking at a page, you're looking at somebody's very strict, like there are guidelines, it's a script, essentially, you're reading something. And what I have observed in you is opening into, again, a much, much more fluid approach with that as your background and your launching point, but a very fluid approach to so many things, which leads me to a ground, like a framing question. How do you define creativity, and how has that evolved over the years?
Right, yeah. I think there is a big risk in classical music that it will be like the classics, and you have to get them right. And you do that by looking at an authoritative score. And to me, that's not the way that musical creativity works, and that's not the way that the best performers accomplish what they do, or the best composers, obviously. So I think there is a huge possibility of limiting things, bringing in restrictions, bringing in authority, and I think that's not part of most people's experience of classical music until it's imposed on them in some way. So yeah, for me, classical music is always like finding out about new possibilities, finding out about things I didn't know, loving things that I didn't know were there before I found them.
So how do you get from being a classically trained pianist to the Pet Shop Boys?
The Pet Shop Boys. Well, part of that is that as my life developed, I more and more identified with myself as a queer person. And the Pet Shop Boys are a really interesting group. They're a pop group. They were at their most productive and most valuable, in my opinion, from around 1985 to around 2007. What that means is that they were basically poets of the era of First World AIDS and HIV. So, and that was very much a part of their music. They were sometimes very explicit, at least the people who had ears to hear, about that concern. And more often they were very clear about addressing gay male people in an era of suffering and oppression. And I found that really fascinating to work with. And again, that was part of my own sense of my changing identity. I was married to a woman for a long time, mostly very beautifully, and we have wonderful children together. And in the 80s and into the 90s, I was less and less clear about what my sexuality was, what I wanted my life to be. And thinking about the Pet Shop Boys was part of thinking about that.
And how did you carry that into what you've been teaching, your pedagogy?
Great question. Yeah, I am super lucky to work for a university that doesn't try to control my teaching. So if I want to teach a new course on some new area of research, I schedule it, and no one says, "Hey, why are you doing this? Why is this okay? Is this part of our mission?" Nobody questions me like that. So I've been able for a long time to teach courses on music in relation to gender and sexuality without any friction from my department or my university. And so I have taught courses about things that include the Pet Shop Boys. To me, they are presently not the most intensely interesting thing, and I think I'm finished writing about them. And my writing goes back to the 90s, and it's not my main concern now. And why is that? I think they were very intensely interesting in a time when HIV was present. There was intense homophobia in response to that, and a kind of sense of self-protectiveness. So a lot of their songs are kind of double-voiced. You can hear that they're about the lives of gay men if you already have a context for that, but it's not in your face, so to speak, and I think that was really crucial for their enormous success in the 80s. But again, that's something I used to teach about. That's something that to my students now is quite foreign. They listen to the Pet Shop Boys and they think, what is this evasive, closetty stuff? Ick. Mm-hmm. And they want something very different. They want loneliness, ick, they want something that's all about being completely open and not about something that has to do with secrecy and self-protection.
So shifting gears slightly, how did poetry enter the picture in your life, in your creative path?
Yeah, that is so interesting to me. I wrote poetry when I was in high school. Possibly you remember some of this. And in my first year of college at Southern Methodist University, I was there for only 1 year. And then I transferred to Cornell. In my first year of college, I was very, very close friends with a man named Michael Sims, who has turned out to be an incredible professional poet and also the leader of a press that publishes poetry, Autumn Hill Press. We were very close. We saw each other every day. We wrote poetry and we showed it to each other. And it was kind of the culmination of my high school creative writing. He's still a really wonderful friend, as in lots of cases I kind of lost contact for a while. And then Facebook has put us back together in really lovely ways. Same for you, Kathy, as you know. With Kathy, it was partly a reunion of our high school class. I guess 30 years, because I remember how strange it was to be in a room where everyone was 48 years old, which is not something that comes up so easily. But the creative writing is something that I kind of put aside when I was doing the PhD thing and trying to become an effective writer of scholarly writing, which is unfortunately a rather limited genre. Not everything can happen in scholarly writing. And that's something that I've written about and that I've complained about as a professional in my field. But I had some significant changes in my life around 2011. I left a long-term partnership. I started another very different partnership. The second was same-sex. And I did things that I had been inhibited about before. I don't know if this is fair. I thought that my previous partner would be kind of inquisitive and judgmental if I were doing creative writing. Again, I don't know that that was fair. I think that could easily have been projection on my part. But with my new partner, we started taking creative writing courses, and we I really enjoyed it. It felt like a really terrific opening up, and also like a return to something that I'd done in the past and stopped doing. So my creative writing is often what people used to call confessional, which means personal, intimate, saying things that people often don't say in everyday life. And it was incredibly rewarding and therapeutic for me. And taking creative writing courses with my then partner, Tekka, was an incredibly lovely part of my life. And he wrote very beautifully as well. He was doing it partly because he's Mexican and he was learning to write in English, but he was super accomplished from the get-go. He wrote an incredibly beautiful story, nonfiction story, about his sister leaving when she left the family without telling anyone to go to the United States to try to find work, which is where she still is, and how bereft he was when that happened. And he read it at a creative writing event, and people were weeping, of course, as he was also by the end. So that kind of opened up something for me, and I have found it really valuable for myself and also for my students that I'm involved in creative writing. I invite my students to write in all kinds of ways that feel natural to them and to explore and experiment, and that's very different from your academic practices.
Well, then, speaking of practices, sorry?
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, speaking of practices, how does meditation fit in with this?
Yeah, I started taking a meditation course when I was in early stages of my marriage dissolving. And it was a strange thing. I didn't know how much I needed it when I started it. And I've sometimes said that it was kind of like dogs barking before an earthquake. That I didn't know why I was so drawn to it, but the meditation gave me ways of being with my emotions from a standpoint of stability and calm and curiosity that was invaluable to me in the upheaval that came a little bit after. And then when my lovely ex, still one of the most precious people in my life, Tekka, moved to be with me in Virginia for 2 years from Mexico, we were looking for things to do together, and the two things that were most consequential were creative writing courses together, and the Insight Meditation Community of Charlottesville, which is a very, very beautiful meditation group that has been around for a number of years. And we kind of casually went to a meeting, and we were both blown away by the quality of the meditation guidance and the quality of the experience. And so that was partly a way of being together for him and me. But also from before that, it has also been a way of dealing with really stressful, really difficult emotions and finding ways to be with them with full awareness, without at a loss of center, freaking out.
And you
essentially that's something.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Go on.
Sorry, go ahead. No,
well,
please, go ahead.
You've used this in your teaching at university.
Yeah,
meditation.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So how does that fit in with a music class?
I think it fits in very clearly and in a way kind of simply. With teaching music, it's possible to do it in a way that's kind of distanced from experience. Like you can teach music theory about here are the notes and here's how they go together and this is good and this is not so good. Or you can consistently address students' experiences. So what was that like for you? What did you notice? And then let's go to the piece and let's see what's there in other terms and what it might have to do with your experience. And meditation, the way that I understand it, it's basically about being present to your own experiences. And that's a little different from the impression that people sometimes take away from introductory meditation instruction. the idea can seem to be that you stop thinking, you put thoughts out of your head is just empty. That's a very valuable initial stage to stop being taken over by your thinking in the way that we usually are. But if you continue meditation study in the tradition that I'm trained in, which is Vipassana meditation, mindfulness meditation, it's basically not about having an empty mind. It's about being able to be with whatever comes up for you, however intense, however difficult, without losing your balance, without being overwhelmed, being able to observe and think about everything that happens. And in relation to music, I think the value of meditation, it encourages you to not be distracted and to be present with what's happening.
And I think this is a good spot for us to take our first break. When we come back, I'd like to talk to you about the summer workshop that you attended, that it's a truly extraordinary event and seemed to me to completely embody all the possibilities of Neptune and Pisces. Back in a few minutes, everyone.
Conscious media for conscious minds. OMTimes. Host your show on IOM-FM, the radio network of OMTimes Media, one of the more recognized brand names in the conscious community, and is backed by the extensive marketing reach of OMTimes. Hosting a show on IOM-FM immediately connects you with our extensive dedicated community.
Grab a cup of tea or a glass of wine and tune in for Inspired Conversations with publisher Linda Joy on Tuesdays at 2 p.m. Eastern. Linda creates sacred space for leading female luminaries, empowering authors, heart-centered female entrepreneurs, coaches, and healers. A soulful venue where guests openly share the fears and obstacles they've overcome, wisdom and lessons learned, and the personal journey that led them to the transformational work they do in the world. Inspired Conversations to empower you on your path to authentic, soulful living.
Want help with your own celestial compass? Visit my site, empowermentunlimited.net, for Astro Insight forecasts for each week, month, and new and full moon. Want to explore the personal impact? Make a decision? Understand another person? It is possible. Click the Services tab to book a personal session with me. That address again, empowermentunlimited.net.
Ascending Hearts is no ordinary dating site, but a spiritual dating site with a purpose, to link you with your soulmate. We engineer the serendipity so you can trust that you will attune with someone that has the same matching vibration as you. Ascending Hearts, the conscious dating site for the spiritually aware. Try Ascending Hearts for free, ascendinghearts.com.
You came across someone struggling with hunger. How would you recognize them? Would you notice an 8-year-old girl who's not excited for summer break
because she may not be having lunch again until September?
Or a war veteran who's having a hard time
landing a job and getting back on his feet?
I am the 1 in 8 Americans who struggle with hunger. I am hunger in America.
Hunger can be hard to recognize. Learn why at IamHungerInAmerica.org, brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
Welcome back to Celestial Compass. We're talking about the wildly boundary-blurring creative possibilities of Neptune and Pisces with my longtime friend, Fred Everett Maus. And Fred, I would very much like now to talk about this extraordinary immersive experience that you had in Mexico this summer, La Pocha Nostra, a summer school. Could you tell me how you found out about it in the first place?
Yeah, that part is easy. I have a friend who is a very brilliant actor and performance artist here in Mexico City, where I am at the moment, Cuauhtemoc. And he has been involved with La Pocha Nostra over the years, and also with the Living Theater. which still exists and is still productive. And his initial idea is that the two of us would go to La Pocha Nostra Summer School this year together, which would have been incredible. He's fantastically creative and fun, and I'm completely in love with him. It turned out that he had a schedule conflict, which is not completely a sad thing. It means that he had performance opportunities, which for an actor, they come and go, and you never know what's next. And he had some really beautiful opportunities, so I went by myself. So, how was I interested in this group? I've been involved with things that are related to the things that Pocha Nostra does over many years. So, from the 90s on, I was a student of the remarkably creative composer, musician Pauline Oliveros, who did things that are very much like performance art, and who studied ritual as part of her planning of her own thinking. And I've been very involved with a group of artists called Fluxus, from the late 50s, 1960s onward, who did kinds of art that were very performance-oriented, very non-museum oriented, and very non-commercial. So they did not want to make money off of their art. They wanted to come up with things for people to do that would be fun and that would be rewarding and evocative and enlightening. And so I've been working with that material and teaching it for a long time. La Pocha Nostra is different in some ways. It's very Mexican. It's very engaged with Mexican and Chicano and border politics. Pocha is a slightly rude word for someone who is very U.S. identified but comes from a Mexican and Chicano background. And it's ironic in this case, they're not particularly like that. But they do performance art, and it is often, but not always, somewhat political in obvious ways. And so Claude Tamark said, why don't we go to this together? And I thought, this seems like one of the most interesting things I could possibly do. And he had to draw back from that, but I went ahead with this. So it was a week-long course, 7 days, 6 hours per day of performance art activities. Most of the students were established performance artists. Some of them quite young, some of them not so much. And I was in there as someone who was, I think, pretty much ready for anything, but not with the very advanced skills that some of these people had. And they also came from many different backgrounds, so there was no uniform ideology in this group. But there was a kind of openness to new experiences. One of the things that was fascinating to me about La Pocha Nostra is that we would do activities and the language involved would be restricted to the instructions for what you were about to do. And we were strongly encouraged not to take everything into talking about it afterwards. Okay. And that was interesting to me because partly in my teaching in public university, I do think it's important to give people a chance to process together by talking after doing something that might be kind of intense. And La Pocha Nostra was very different from that. So the idea was that if you did something and then you talked about it, you were taking it from your body up into your head. And that was a real loss. And I completely got that. It was very pervasive throughout the week. And really fascinating to me. And different from my own assumptions as a teacher and practitioner.
So that was part of the real immersive aspect of it. You just became one with it, and that was it. You didn't then try to manipulate it intellectually.
Absolutely, yeah. So one of the most intense things that we did halfway through the week, and this is something that's kind of a Pocha Nostra classic, but two people who had experience with the group, and therefore they weren't going to freak out. They were naked on two parallel tables, and for about an hour, we had markers, and we wrote and draw on their naked bodies. and it was an amazing atmosphere. It was very serious and very respectful. I and some other people stepped out of the room to cry partway through because it was so intense. And part of it was that it was so intense and you couldn't say exactly what the emotions were or what it meant. And after an hour of this, partway through, they turned over so that we could have access to every part of their bodies. Afterward, they stood up, they looked at each other. Their eyes were closed throughout this process. They stood up, they looked at each other, we all looked at them. Again, it was a kind of intense, nonverbal processing moment. And then we had lunch break, and the instructors said, go ahead and have lunch with your friends. We would prefer that you not talk about this experience. If you want to journal about it, go ahead. But that to me was fascinating. Partly it's something that I could never do in a public university. That's not the way that we do things. And that was clarifying for me to see that there were things that we couldn't do in my job. But also the idea that you would do something super intense and you would just metabolize it afterward and not talk to people about it and make sense of it, probably limit it with language and bring it up into the head, as our teacher said. That was fascinating to me.
Weren't there also lots of opportunities to don clothing and trappings, to play with different ways of being and take on different personas? Did I get that correctly from some of the photographs?
Absolutely, yes. We were all asked to bring props, basically clothing, but other things as well, to use during the week. And we had a huge long table of things that people had brought, and they were all up for everyone's use. When you brought something and put it on the table, you were giving up your private property rights for a time. And we did really wonderful exercises. We did a lot of exercises in pairs. So we would walk around the space that we were in, which was a huge black box theater with a kind of stand, like an athletic stand at one end of seats. We would walk around this area and choose someone to be with for the next exercise. The exercises began. This is super intense. This is also something I don't think I can do in my UVA state-sponsored classes. The exercises would begin with about 5 minutes of the two people in a pair staring into each other's eyes, which was super intense always, of course.
Okay. Let's talk about this for a second, because I experienced that in some AIDS volunteer training. I think we looked in another guy and I looked in each other's eyes for 20 minutes.
Wow.
Did you have the experience of feeling like you had been just immersed in somebody else's soul?
Yes, and it's really interesting because usually if we think about knowing someone, we think about knowing things about them. And this was not like that. We didn't necessarily know anything about the person that we were with. But there was still this really intense intimacy of being with someone, being with someone's soul, as you said.
What I found afterwards was I had absolutely nothing in common with the person I had been paired with, except that, arguably we were humans and we were in the same room and lived in the same city. But afterwards, there was an energy of regard that I experienced through the rest of the workshop with this person from the sensitizing of having done that. Would that be something you could resonate with?
Oh, absolutely, yes, and that goes very deep. We think about people by using concepts, don't we? And we think this person is like me, this person is not like me, this person I don't have much to say to them, this person I might like to be their friend. And this sort of starting from the ground up, it's just kind of like being with each other, looking at each other. It cut past that. It meant there was a kind of shared humanity that was unavoidable, no matter what else.
So what happened after that portion? what happened after that portion of the exercise?
We did different things, and the two things that we did most often, one was that we would do a kind of bodily improvisation where the instructions were for the two of us to have a conversation, but without words, with bodily movement. Okay, so one person would do something, and the other person would watch and then respond to that. You know, no rules beyond that, no instructions, just like responding to the other person's bodily movement. And that was mostly beautiful. I had a couple of duets with someone who was very psychologically dominant, and after a while that got a little bit tedious. So for them, improvising together was kind of like establishing a relationship of doer and done to, and that wasn't my thing. But again, by and large, they were just gorgeous experiences. And another thing we would do, we did this many times, and this was fascinating. One person would decide to do the materials for a work of art. And after looking into each other's eyes for a while, they would close their eyes. And then the person who was the artist would be free to move their body, arrange the person's body in whatever way they wanted to. And of course, anyone who said this is too much could say so. But they would arrange the person's body, and then they would go to the table of clothing prompts and other things and dress them up, make them into a character. And as the person who was the raw material for this work of art, your eyes were closed, you didn't know what was happening until later. You would be put in a posture and adorned. And then the rest of the class, after the time of arranging the raw materials was over, the rest of the class would walk slowly around the room and take everyone in. And then the person who had done the raw material would eventually be allowed to open their eyes, and maybe the last person to know what had happened. And that was so fascinating. A lot of this depended heavily on trust. Mm-hmm. You needed to think you were going to be okay. My partner improvisation top sometimes left me feeling like I was not okay, but by and large, the idea was that you felt very safe with the other person. So there was more an experience of just curiosity about what's happening to me.
Did you experience any anxiety while your eyes were shut? Or did you just, what did you do? Were you meditating when you were the material?
I was just sitting there kind of being with the present moment, which could be a meditative state, and thinking, I don't know now and I will know later. And again, I worked mostly with people that I very deeply trusted. Mm-hmm. So I don't know, your listeners, our listeners don't have access to this, but I don't know if you've seen my profile picture or the picture I posted after the sessions. But I have a picture of myself arranged by a friend now, someone I met during these sessions, as a kind of beautiful and scary god or goddess. And I loved what he did. I thought it was just fantastic. It's a young, really promising performance artist. And so I was not anxious when he was working on me. I completely trusted him. One of the first things we did in the week, we did this on the first day, and it was to establish trust as much as you can do that, briefly in one day. So the teachers told us, you're going to run with your eyes closed. It sounded terrifying. And then they continued and they explained, and it became very different. So the idea is we were each going to take a turn running from one corner of this large room to the other with our eyes closed, but along the side there would be a line on either side of us of other students, other participants. And if we began to lose a sense of where we were, they would guide us back to where we needed to be running. So it was actually a very beautiful and intense experience of trusting other people. No one was going to mess this up. Everyone was very concerned for each person as they ran. So we each ran one by one corner to the other. And then we ran with our eyes closed backwards. And then the third time we were supposed to make a performance of it in some way. And that was super fun.
So how did your experience of this process, by the end of it, how was your attitude about all of it in compared to what you were when you showed up?
Yeah, I did not know what was going to happen when I came. I trust my friend Pocha, who urged me to go to this, and he's done these workshops twice. And so I basically expected something good. I'm not myself primarily a performance artist. I teach Plexus material and Polynovaris material, so I do this in my classes. But many of the people in the group, again, were accomplished professional performance artists. So I didn't know how it was going to work out. I thought maybe I would be a bust. The other people tell me that was absolutely not true. They really enjoyed the presence there. But I went in with a lot of trust already. Yeah.
And by the end of it, did your attitude about yourself or your own capabilities or anything, did you notice like control dissolving or anything like that?
Oh, huge change, and definitely control dissolving was a big part of it. A lot of what we did was improvisational, and you don't decide in advance what you're going to do and then do it. You find what you're going to do by doing it. And I have experience with that. There's a musician in Charlottesville where I live part-time when I'm not in Mexico. Stephen Nachmanovich, who writes about improvisation, and he has this very beautiful thing where once a month he has a potluck. He and his wife Leslie have a potluck at their beautiful home, and then it's followed by improvisation together. And the improvisation can be anything. It doesn't need to be sound-oriented. It can be, doing bowel movements or speaking or whatever. And I've done that for several years. I've done to Stephen's potlucks. And they're really lovely experiences. So I had some background with not knowing what's going to happen, trusting the people that I'm with, trusting myself, and just relaxing into it. Pocha Nostra had many aspects that went way beyond what Stephen does. So there was a lot of naked time. And after a couple of days, some of the participants were naked almost all the time. There was a lot about sexuality, and again, that's something that's not part of Stephen's world, and it's not part of anything I can do with teaching. But it felt very, very safe. And the teachers were just brilliant at making that happen, at not making it seem like people were being judged and criticized.
Have you sensed any kind of immediate effect now that you're back on your own creativity or even just like your approach to life?
Great question, and the answer is yes. I think it really changed me. So I think I am much less preoccupied with planning what's going to happen, much more willing to be with whatever comes up, which in my current relationship with my boyfriend Frank, that's a very valuable thing because he's quite unpredictable. But just in general with life, that's a really beautiful thing. I've been thinking about what I can do to take some of this material into my courses at UVA. Obviously, we're not going to be naked, drawing on each other's bodies. But one thing that I really want to work with is the duo improvisations that were kind of bodily conversations. I thought those were really wonderful. I will need in teaching to make some things clear to my students, like be very aware of the experience of the other person. Don't do something that will make them super uncomfortable, unless it seems to be welcome, but often it won't. Okay, maybe no bodily contact, which in the Pocha Nostra sessions, that became more and more part of those duo improvisations. So by the last few days, we had a couple guys, friends of mine, who were doing like super erotic improvisations together with total body contact. And it was gorgeous. And it's not something that I think I can do in my state university job. But that's just one thing that was really beautiful about this group is the sense of acceptance of everyone. And that came out very, very clearly in the experience of a trans man who is part of the group, who, not surprisingly, as a trans man, often feels that he needs to pass to be safe. He feels that very much when he's traveling by road across the country. It's really frightening to think that someone might identify him as trans because there are so many negative and violent attitudes out there. And he said at the end of the week that this was the first time that he had felt completely free to be who he was in front of a group of people. And he was crying when he said that, and other people were crying too. It was very, very beautiful. So that kind of acceptance is part of this La Pocha Nostra culture. The group is very queer. I would say a majority, maybe more than a majority, maybe like 99% of people in the student group would not have identified as straight or cisgender. Mm-hmm. And it was so beautiful to hear my friend, the trans man, saying this at the end. At the beginning of the course, we were all invited to go up one by one in groups of 1 to 3 and just do something bodily to introduce ourselves. And this man went up and stood on a little platform and raised his shirt so that his chest, with his scars from his top surgery, was apparent. He's also not thin, and so his body shape was apparent. And people cried when he did that. It was just so moving. It was part of this kind of, atmosphere of acceptance that was so lovely in this week. It's what life should be like and not like.
And I hope those of you listening out there understand the astrological framework. There is a point to my having invited Fred to talk about all this, because there is a blurring, we are all one, we are all together, healing, synthesizing, dissolving potential in Neptune, the planet of transcendence, being in its home sign of Pisces. And we've got this going for another 1.5 years. So it might be a really valuable exercise for people to see how they might harness this or catch it working in their own lives and look at what they've been going through in the past few years from the perspective of how is your sense of identity and your relation to the rest of reality dissolved, eroded, become cleaned in some way. So.
Wow, that's really beautiful. So we have a year to be ourselves.
No, we have a lot longer than that, but I'm encouraging people to really start.
Forever. Yeah. We have forever, but we have a kind of special opportunity right now.
And I appreciate your being so open in sharing all of this with us. From the moment you told me you were going to go to this workshop to seeing the photos afterwards, I thought, oh, this is it. It's in a nutshell. And I really appreciate your talking about it. How, if someone wants to know more, how can they find you? I know you have an Instagram account. You're not real. You say you don't have much there, but there are a few photos of things that happened in your workshop.
A lot of photos of my boyfriend.
Okay, that too.
One of my very beautiful ex with whom I'm reconnecting now. My Instagram is not my thing. I guess the thing to do would be to email me at Fred, Fred, MBA, that's like Fred Maus in Virginia, Fred MBA at Gmail. And I would welcome messages there. You can also friend request me at Fred MBA on Facebook, and I do have a lot of material on Facebook.
It's true. You absolutely do. Well, it'll be fascinating to see how this then plays out in your next semester and the next year with your students. I'm sure that the waves will continue to dredge up more and more and more and affect everyone that you come in contact with.
Absolutely. I am totally still processing. It was a super intense experience, La Pocha Nostra. And you don't know at the end what has happened. So it's sorting itself out, and it will. Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate your candor and your telling everybody about it. And the rest of you out there, please pay attention to the dual retrogrades or the multiple retrogrades going on. And remember that there are forecasts to help you get through this at OMTimes.com, where I also have a Mercury retrograde guide, and at my site, empowermentunlimited.net. And thanks a bunch, Fred. I really appreciate it.
Kathy, it is absolutely thrilling to know them from the time that we were 6 and to still find so much that's rewarding with that experience. Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye, everyone.